standing here in front of everybody, I'm feeling a little bit nervous. But what I want to talk about today is actually the theme. So, genius loves company. But what I really believe is that genius loves good company. But what does that mean? What does it mean to be in good company? And what does it mean to be good company to other people? So I think there's a lot of ways to be in good company. I don't think there's just one magic trick that makes it suddenly good company. But I do want to talk about something specific today. And I want to start by giving an example of my best family friends who are really, really good company. So my family and their family will have dinner together, and we'll all be sitting around the table. And they put everything out on the table, both figuratively and literally. So we'll all sit down to dinner, and they'll have us all go around and say how we're feeling. So not like, yeah, I'm fine today, but really get into how are we doing? How are we feeling in the moment? How was our day? Or we'll have a discussion at the table about someone, something going on in one of their lives, and maybe it gets a little directed or a little bit heated. And instead of running away from the situation, like we so often find that we do, they lean into it and they say, wow, I'm feeling kind of upset, I'm feeling kind of nervous. Can we change the way we're talking about this? Can we talk about it in a different way? And so what I think kind of defines this relationship is emotional vulnerability. And I define emotional vulnerability as honesty plus exposure. So not just being honest, even though that's important and necessary and good, but being honest in a way that makes you feel emotionally exposed and makes you feel seen. So I want to quote this researcher named Brené Brown, because I think she says it pretty much perfectly. Owning our story can be hard, but not nearly as difficult as spending our lives running from it. Embracing our vulnerabilities is risky, but not nearly as dangerous as giving up on love and belonging and joy, the experiences that make us the most vulnerable. Only when we are brave enough to explore the darkness will we discover the infinite power of our light. So, what about emotional vulnerability makes for good company? So first of all, when you're vulnerable with somebody, you are letting them in on the absolute truth of your life and your experience. And that's a gift, because you're saying, okay, I'm going to say something to you that's really hard to say, and you can do that with me too, and that's okay. And not only that, but you're letting people be imperfect, because the human condition is one of imperfection. We are all imperfect. And when you're vulnerable with somebody, you're saying, hey, I'm imperfect, and I'm going to show you, and I'm scared. But you're imperfect too, and that's okay. And it's okay that I'm imperfect as well. And more than that, when you are vulnerable with somebody, it is incredibly bonding, because you're being seen, and a lot of the times being accepted for what's real, very, very real to who you are. But that's why it's worth it, because it takes a lot of courage. Because society kind of tells us that vulnerability is not a good thing, and that we should always be calm, cool, collected, and fine all the time. Yet nobody is fine all the time. Everybody sitting in this room has had a time in their life, probably many, when they haven't been fine. But here's the thing, being vulnerable is different for everybody. So what makes me feel vulnerable might not be what makes somebody else feel vulnerable, because vulnerability is based off of your life experiences, something fundamental to who you are, or your insecurities even. So it's different for everybody. So I want to give real life examples so that you guys can find ones that you identify with and you can recognize it and be like, okay, I can try that, or I've felt that in my life before. But the first one, I think everyone can probably relate to. So when you like someone in a romantic way, and you say to them, I like you, and I want to be with you. Whew, that is a leap of vulnerability. Or when you're with somebody and you say, hey, I want to be in a relationship. Or when you're in a relationship and you say, I love you for the first time. And it's things like these that make us feel so vulnerable because there's a potential for rejection. You don't know how it's going to go. It might not go well. They might not feel the same way. But here's the thing. There's some little vulnerabilities too. You don't have to start with the big, I want to be with you sorts of vulnerabilities. You can start small. So I want to tell a story about a class I'm in this semester, actually. So we did a reading for this class, and I had a really strong opinion about it. I was like, okay, I know what I'm going to say. So I wrote down a lot of quotes, and I went to class, and I raised my hand. I was the first one to be called on, and I made my point. And I was like, I know I'm right. I know I'm right. And then right after I spoke, another student responded to me. And as he was talking, I realized that I no longer agreed with what I had literally just said. And I agreed with him. So I was thinking, okay, what do? I could just push forward and continue to try to make my point. Or I could say, I think I was wrong. I think I agree with you. So in front of the whole class, I was turning bright red. I was sweating. I was freaking out. I said, whew, I was wrong. I take back what I literally just said. I don't agree with it anymore. And for me, that felt like actually a pretty big leap of vulnerability. But it relates to other ones too. So admitting you were wrong, or admitting you made a mistake, and apologizing. It's these sort of vulnerabilities that do make us feel seen in a way that is relatively uncomfortable, but it's honest. And then the next step, asking for help, saying, I don't know what to do, or I made a mistake. Can you help me? It's these sorts of vulnerabilities that we can work on a day-to-day basis. Because that's the thing. Vulnerability is a muscle. It's something you can get better at. It's something that you can practice. On the other hand, you can tell embarrassing stories about your life and laugh at yourself. This is an amazing act of vulnerability. It's one of those little ones that can help you get stronger and stronger at it. But also, crying in front of other people is another sort of vulnerability, because you're going to be seen and you're going to be exposed, and it's definitely true to who you are. But then again, getting angry can be really an act of vulnerability. So if you grew up in a family where people didn't get angry and you don't really feel comfortable with that, getting angry with somebody can be a huge act of vulnerability and is important, actually, in a lot of ways. And then people over the past few weeks who spoke up at forums on campus about what's been happening with discussions about racism, that is an act of vulnerability. And to me, it takes so much more strength to get up and tell your story, whatever is true to you, and not know how people are going to respond than anything else. I also think, like I said, our vulnerabilities can often be tied into our insecurities. So a particularly hard vulnerability is admitting out loud and saying it, what you feel you deserve or what you need. So saying things like, I need my space, or I need you to stay with me, or I deserve someone who will listen. It's funny, even in this moment, saying that's hard, even though I'm not saying it in any context. But I think that's the thing, that sometimes it's particularly hard to address vulnerabilities that are also tied into an insecurity that's specific to who we are. Then again, breaking up with somebody can be a huge act of vulnerability. Because with other vulnerabilities, you kind of have a swing response. It could go well, it could not go well. But when you break up with somebody, it's probably not going to go well. People don't usually want to be broken up with. Best case scenario, they're reasonable and rational, but it's still not what they're going to want to hear. And that's the thing. Vulnerability is really hard, but it's the fact that it's hard that makes you know it's vulnerability. If it wasn't hard, it wouldn't be vulnerability. It might still be honesty, which is important, but it's the element of exposure that makes it vulnerability. I do think, though, in general, people respond well to it. There's something very appealing about somebody being so honest. But it doesn't always go well. You know, I've had times in my life where I've been vulnerable with somebody, and they've been like, oh, okay, cool, great. And I'm always like, all right, well, that was interesting. But here's the thing. I still feel good, and you still feel good after you practice vulnerability, because you're being true to your own experience. But what do we do when it gets hard? So as a kid, my mom used to say to me, name the wall. So when you're about to practice vulnerability, okay, you're preparing yourself, you step up, and you hit a wall oftentimes. And this wall can be embarrassment, or shame, or nervousness, or fear, anything. And it's that wall that usually keeps us from being vulnerable and taking that next step. But my mom used to say, name the wall. You can literally out loud just say, wow, I'm feeling really nervous, I'm feeling really scared, but I want to tell you anyways. And oftentimes when you name the wall and you put it out there, it kind of drops away and you feel a lot better. And then you can take that next step into the next level of vulnerability. I believe that being vulnerable with other people, with somebody else in a group on a stage, is the most beautiful and powerful and important way to live and to be in good company. I believe in vulnerability more than I believe in anything else. So I really, really hope that people will be willing to try it. And like I said, you can start small and work your way up to the bigger vulnerabilities. But I hope that you'll be willing to try it because being vulnerable has changed my life and the lives of so many people that I love, and I've learned a lot from them. So I want to thank all those people, my friends and my family, because I didn't just come up with this idea out of my head. I was taught about this my whole life. So I do want to say, though, that I'm not the queen of vulnerability. Like, oftentimes in my life, I will step up to a moment of vulnerability and I'll hit a wall and I'll walk away. And I think that's just the reality of vulnerability, because it's a lifelong process. It's something we're always trying to get better at and be more comfortable with. And it's okay to fail. It doesn't mean that next time you won't be able to be vulnerable. So I want to end my talk with my favorite very, very short quote. It's by Edouard Bouabat, who was a French photographer. And this quote is on stage with me, right here, in a painting that's normally in my room. And it's the background of my computer, and it's the cover photo on my Facebook. So it's very important to me. And he said this: "You cannot live when you are untouchable. Life is vulnerability." Thank you.